Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. So I am Andre, substituting my dear friend Sergio with this surviving crisis and sustaining its science and decentralized persistent identifiers for an uncertain future. And let me please begin my presentation from the two citations. From the first one is from Maurizio Ferraris. You can just read it on the slide. It's about the documedia revolution we have right now everywhere and for everyone, as all the old productivity things we have over the data are not working. And where we had the one-to-many model of interaction, now we should always have many-to-many. And we have here this picture. After the last 3 weeks and a lot of malicious software integrated in the NPM package and something like that in the open source community, the many scandals and many stories, we have exactly that. The open infrastructure that holds everything on the one single and the fragile shoulder. So the openness is essential for the science. It is essential for a knowledge, just because there is another citation. Actually, I don't even remember from where, but it's very, very ancient. And it speaks that when people are crying, when the people are dying, the cities were crying when let's say, the dealing and the businesses are dying. It's a translation, so please forgive me if I'm not so precise. But the civilizations will cry when the books will burn. So this is what we are sustaining right now. This is why we should persist and make the science resilient. And this is the main topic for us, very well illustrated with this picture. To do that, for last times, the FAIR principles were invented and established as the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. But all of them are requiring that one, let's say, from the first look, the simplest thing, the persistency in the identification. And once you know where to find it, then it's trivial to make all the other things doable. So here are the principles, and we are thinking about how to implement that. And here we have risks and crises. And reading this simple table on the slide, where we can understand that for every point emphasized here is the obvious crisis we have right now. For example, when we are speaking about the institutional failure, when you're losing your website, you are losing all the data in the most cases. And when you're losing the funding, you are losing the server. So again, you are losing the data. And it happened for many cases all around the world. And the last case we all remember, it's the health governance, data governance in the USA. For the legal pressures, the content is intentionally made inaccessible. As I am Russian, I could say that now it's being done in Russia every day. We are losing actually gigabytes of data every day. And we all know what I'm speaking about. It's a warfare in Ukraine. The people are disappearing without a prompt. It's the first point. And the second point, which is an European Union. Some months ago, actually 3 or 4 months ago, one of the most prospective technologies about identifying and widespreading the data, which uses it is in D-climate, the interplanetary file system, was listed in the piracy and counterfeit watch list of the European Commission as a technology, not as, let's say, the factor or the use case, as a technology. So the linkage to the data is broken as a premise, not a promise, we can say. And for the third point, for a neglect and censorship, again, we all understand what I'm talking about. When it's something that someone is intended to prohibit to reproduce and being redistributed, then it will be the link that points to the wrong position. And if the knowledge is inconvenient, we should still have a right, at least, to identify and to find that, and to prevent this point of crisis. But obviously, we still have it. For the global systemic risks, for the climate change, for warfare, for other, regardless of institutional intents, we can do obviously nothing. But here is a point. Here is a point. We should stay resilient, because when we are starting decomposing the term of identification, we are going to this pyramid. And if we will decompose every question mark here, we would obviously say that the right answer is no for every question mark here. But only having the, let's say, the true condition here, we should obtain the goal we have. The persistent over the crisis for the given data and for the given knowledge at the end, at the very end. And here is how the story begins. And now we are going to the problem of persistent identification. I'm sure that everyone knows what the problem is. But now it's about the evolution. The evolution started many years ago from the Digital Object Identifier Alliance. But actually, we will see that it has not evolved together with the community and with the sustainability purpose. Actually, it was a project, it was a commercial project of the global north, and to which it led today. Some countries are now out of the scope for the DOI. Not because they are poor, not because they just cannot afford it, but because of for their arbitrary reason. It could be done and could be done by the decision of a foreign access control division, just by one country and without anything else, without anyone else. So the sanctioning is literally a legal pressure, what was described in the previous slides, and this is how it works. The worst thing is that DOI is now probably the only most widespread persistent identification system, which is actually was at first commercially intended, and it locks the data and the metadata over the paywall. So it substitutes governance over the metadata with the sovereignty. And this is a proof of that. This is a copy of the letter on the mailing list with a link. As the presentation will be shared, it will be preserved, and it's a letter by John Mallory about identifying the metadata and the publications. So we're seeing that it's the system formulated as a commercial foundation. So despite it was intended to be done like that, the system became the system became huge, and the system became the leader. But now this leader is frozen in its evolution. And we have, according to the articles of the last 2 years, we have a lot of rotten links on DOI. So you have a link, but you can click it and you will not see anything, just because the metadata would be preserved, but another bunch of data you want to access are no longer presented. And also there is it's a huge use case about the so-called sensitive data, because the main question here, if you are accessing it over the public system like UI, is should we know and should we allow others to know that these data are sensitive? And the governance model of DOI actually is intended to be prohibited. So we have here the platformization. So we have a platform, and this platform actually, instead of holding the access management, it holds the sovereignty over our metadata. And we are coming to the main problem, which I would emphasize. Instead of having a single point of failure and the projects like huge, centralized, and let's say singularly controlled, the decentralized, redundant, and resilient by design. And this could be one of the possible solutions is a decentralized identification made by now mostly by the enthusiast and the voluntary projects. Because actually the decentralized model of identification is based on mathematical invariance. So it's as persistent and resilient as the underlying network and standards are. And the best model we have right now about how it would be done, just speaking a bit in advance, it's a BitTorrent network. Used by not only by the infotech pirates, it's also used, for example, by Ubuntu, by the Canonical Incorporated to widespread the Linux distributions. But this system is actually lacking of many features we have for a PID, for a persistent identification. We don't have now working model for every participant where every participant verifies everything. So the client-side reproducibility, which is necessary for FAIR, we don't have still. But here, not to be too long, I should emphasize the two last points. The decentralized persistent identification does not challenge or redefine the traditional model. It should coexist, because otherwise we will lose metadata instead of reproducing them. And the very important point, the last on this slide, it doesn't depend on the blockchain workflow. It's not a necessity. And now we are going, actually, because I am doing this, I may say that we are in the process of proving that it's not necessary. Blockchain is not a key technology. It's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet for this kind of identification. But it exists already something, and there are many other aspects. To make long things short, here's what is decentralization is in the context of a data sharing. It's a collaboration. Decentralized collaborative ecosystem. Let's say we can say decentralized, we can say federated. It's something like the different sides of the same medal. But it's not just a technical solution. It bases on the openness, because you are disclosing yourself. It is based on responsibility match. It's very important that the computation stakeholder, as we have in a blockchain network, should not be an identity owner. He should not hold your keys for you. And the accessibility is made by design. So the decentralization brings us the identification as a social good and not a social contract for everyone. So the model is this. Version repository, but let's say widespread over the network. It's very simple. Provenance and reproducibility by design. This is a model. And here are some solutions made by the project on the global north and global south based on decentralized technologies. Decile Labs in North America are doing DPID, which is based on the hashes. So it's a mathematically determined persistent identifier, but it still couldn't be considered truly federated. It's considered decentralized, but it's very difficult to deploy. Here's another problem. ARC Alliance in South America and partially in the African PID Alliance, so also on the global south, and its sister project Distributed ARC are going to strive to introduce truly decentralized persistent identification. So there are initiatives, and they are numerous over the world. But now we have still global north in leadership, and especially their it's in a leadership with not with collaborating, but with funding and with communication with stakeholders. Here we have an alternative. And this is actually the last slide. It's questions for all our future. It's about the trust because the cryptocurrency now are concentrating on the platform. So we have still the platformization aspect, like Ethereum, like a Bitcoin, and also like the platforms like a tax hub on some cryptocurrencies. So they are keeping as centralized as the government of the underlying state is. So there's a question about the trust. The second is the stakeholders. It's very obvious who should be, and there is no answer still. We don't know. We should just to suggest and to prepare. About the sovereignty still, the infrastructure, should it be owned by society, and what society should it be? It's a very important question, but we still don't have answer. And the levels of sovereignty is come from that, also from that, in the context of redundancy. How should it should be done? The developers of the projects like BitTorrent are saying it should be done explicitly by design. Someone else may think in a different way. The last is how to handle the social conflicts, and should be the mechanism built in the persistent identification solutions or not. All these questions are now without the answers. And we should just keep them in mind, developing our future for the big data. And for now, this is the end of this short story. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready for the questions.
So, any question from the audience? Don't be shy. No first session of the conference, but come on. Yes.
How would a blockchain handle something like adversarial attacks that are intended to poison the content of the blockchain for, say, specific regions? So, like, for example, if I wanted to attack a blockchain that is in that has and make it inaccessible in the US, it would be some, one possibility would be to put CASM encoded into it or linked to it, so that then possession of that blockchain would be illegal in that jurisdiction.
It's actually it's very simple, because now we have, for example, now it's very simple. Once we have, for example, in the UK, the law that requires you to disclose whatever you have in the context of encryption, so the private keys, you have no right to avoid it. You should just make the authority able to make a hard fork over your blockchain. So there is no need to make an attack. In context of a legal pressure, it's very easy. You may just hard fork it and replace the non-resilient blocks.
Very quickly, because we have to move on. Sorry.
As a follow-up, then that hard fork would effectively allow a jurisdiction to censor anything they want.
Yes, exactly. And let's say the attempts were already done, not for the generalized blockchains, but it was done, for example, in Russia for some blockchain-based solutions.